Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Age Group Triathlon Podcast. My name is Simon. I'm a professional triathlon coach, but this week we're not actually talking about triathlon. We're talking about a challenge which a lot of triathletes take on. We're talking about the London Marathon. Now, I'm going to take you through the course, the kind of preparation you might want to do in the last few weeks, the nutrition the days before, and the nutrition on the day of, and just general tips how to approach a marathon. So even if you're not racing London, stick around. There should be some really useful tips for anyone looking to take on any kind of marathon. Now, I've been lucky to run London twice, and so I've got a pretty good feel for the event, and I've helped several people train for it over the years. I've got a couple of people racing this year. So I want to share some insights, some insider tips, and some real life sort of advice on how to take on the marathon. Whether you are an amateur runner or somebody who's experienced, I'm going to try to give you some tips from both sides of the fence. So the first thing to acknowledge is that if you're listening to this when it's released, you've got just under 3 weeks to go into your race day, and this isn't the time to start really cramming training in. You may be doing your longest run of the program, that may still be coming. Sort of this coming weekend. It may be that you've already started your taper, okay? It depends on the kind of athlete you are. What I will say though is that this is not a chance for you to really cram in a bunch of training to get loads fitter, okay? The chances of you adding a load of extra fitness are quite slim, and the chances of you sort of really getting to a point of overreaching, picking up a last minute injury are quite high. I'd always encourage somebody to take things a little bit easy going into a race and still maybe pull something really magical out on the day. Then somebody push themselves really hard in the last couple of weeks, desperately trying to improve some fitness, and then turning up at the start line tired and unmotivated and having a bit of a shocker. So what is it we can be doing in the last 3 weeks? Well, I still would like most people who I'm coaching to do the last, we're probably going to have like 3, maybe 4 good intensity sessions ahead of the race. So there could be hill reps, tempo runs, threshold intervals, whatever it is, 3 good quality sessions maybe on the track where we can really sort of blow the doors off a bit, get a bit of intensity in. Because while we want to drop the volume ahead of a race, we still want to keep some intensity so the legs aren't too flat. I can't really recommend a structure for you, but what I normally recommend for people is as we come into that last week ahead of the race, we don't really want to do much above the intensity that you're planning to race on the day. And we're heading out for sort of 40-minute, hour-long runs, nothing overly difficult. And the day, I normally would say take the Friday off. On the Saturday, do a short sort of 20-minute run where you'll do, work at a little bit of intensity, get the legs woken up, get them turning over so they don't feel like bricks the next day, and just focus on resting. Now, your diet is something you really can influence, and this is incredibly important as we come into race week to be able to get an idea of what it is that we should be eating. So I recommend you want to start thinking about 48 hours, 2 days before you start. You want to start really thinking about, okay, what is it that I'm eating and how is that going to make me feel on race day? Generally speaking, if you're eating a lot of fat and proteins, that's the kind of thing that can backfire, because it takes fat and protein much longer to digest to make their way through their system, and then they're going to sit heavier on your stomach. This isn't to say that we need to avoid all fat, avoid all protein, not at all. However, we do want to make sure that the majority of what we're getting in the last 48 hours is coming from carbohydrate, not only to top up our glycogen stores, but obviously it's easily digestible. However, we do want to be mindful of the amount of fruit and vegetables that we're eating, okay, or anything else that's really high in fibre. Because we can't afford to be making too many trips to the toilet during our marathon. There's a good chance you will have to stop at some point for one reason or another. But we really want to avoid you get to that point where you feel like you're running from Portaloo to Portaloo because you had a bunch of fibre in the days before, which combined with some sports nutrition and the anxiety of race day is starting to backfire in the most unhygienic way possible. My favourite pre-race meal is boiled potatoes, some fish, it might be white fish, might be salmon, and some veg with a little bit of butter. And this is a relatively simplistic meal. Make sure that I avoid any vegetables that have huge amounts of fibre in them. But I know it's something that's going to digest easily. It's simple, it's easy to make, or you can get something that is from a restaurant that reflects that, no matter where you are in the world, broadly speaking. Um, and it's a nice staple go-to. Some people like to pile on pasta. Okay, that's fine. But sort of think about what it is that you had ahead of your long runs and don't really mess with that formula too much. Let's fast forward to the evening before race day. So you want to make sure that you get something, nice and light to eat for dinner. Don't underfeed yourself. Don't go for something that it isn't going to fill you up. Okay, but just avoid anything that's overly fatty. And you want to make sure you get yourself a nice, really early night. Okay. Now, I'm not suggesting that you go to bed at 8 p.m. and you toss and you turn because you don't normally go to bed till midnight. But you really can't afford to be staying up late in the hotel bar, chatting with the others, opening another beer at 11:30. You are going to pay for that tomorrow. Of course, if you're not taking it all that seriously, then hey, you do you. But if you want to really enjoy the experience tomorrow, I recommend you get yourself the earliest night that you can, even if it means lying in bed just reading for a bit. But don't stay up any longer than you absolutely have to. Now, I lived in London for 10 years, so I have a better idea of the scale of the place than some other people. Some people don't make the best choices when it comes to selecting their accommodation. You really need to allow a lot, and I mean a lot, of contingency time to get to the start line. Realistically, you want to be there at your starting pen an hour before your start turn. Yes, I said an hour. Now, this may seem excessive, but there are a number of reasons for this. First of all, it takes a lot longer to get around London than people think. Okay, it's really easy and convenient to get from central London to outer London most of the time. However, getting to Blackheath for the start of the London Marathon is always an absolute pain. Not only is it pretty difficult to get there with the public transport available, but everybody is trying to get to Blackheath. Okay, I remember when I first did the London Marathon, I must have been stood around in a train station, I can't remember which one now, for about 45 minutes, and there was a huge mass of us. And a train would come along, and everybody would squeeze onto a train. That train would leave. Everybody would inch forwards, and they get onto the next one. Okay, maybe I didn't plan my route very well, but the sheer volume of runners, it just means you just have to allow so much contingency time. Luckily, I had, but can you imagine being in that huge throng of people, that everybody running late, knowing they're going to miss their start time? You don't need that stress in your life. On a day that you spent so much time and energy working towards, please just look at Citymapper or Google Maps, whatever it is that you plan to use for your route. Find out how to get to the start. Again, the stations will vary depending on which start pen you're in. Get yourself to the start. Just make sure you have an hour's contingency, just for anything that can go wrong. All it would take would be for there to be one sort of cancelled train or issue obstruction on the track, whatever it could be, and your marathon dreams could go up in smoke. Okay, so I cannot stress this enough. Please, especially if you haven't chosen accommodation, especially close to the start, just make sure you give yourself enough time to get there. And once you get there, you have your bag drop, where you need to drop off your bag that you'll collect at the finish line, and you want to have time to be able to relax, to be able to get yourself in a good headspace, okay, to be able to focus, do any visualizations that you like to do, okay. You don't want to be sprinting from the station to the park, hurling your bag at the van, which they use to transport all of the bags to the finish line, and then sprinting over to your start line, okay, and then having to really start working already, okay. You just want to have time, you want to have peace. It's really important you go into this with the right headspace and don't find yourself rushing around because you couldn't help it hit snooze 5 times. On to the race itself. Now, I recommend you only start your watch when your foot crosses the timing mat under the start arch. Okay, I believe there are 5 starts this year. Probably to reduce overcrowding at different points. But you really want to avoid starting your watch too early, too soon, because what you don't want is you don't want to get to the finish line and you say, "Oh, I did it in, I just achieved my time goal," and then your GPS watch disagrees with the time from your chip and everything. It just starts getting really confusing. Now, for me, time is absolute. Okay, if you cross the line at midday, obviously it's not going to be midday, but it's easy for maths, and you cross the finish line at 3 p.m., that is 3 hours it has taken you to get around that course. No discussion, no arguments, that is the absolute time it took you to complete the event. If you are relying on your GPS, you're going to get very confused, very disappointed, potentially very angry. This is something I'm going to touch on later within the podcast itself. But you want to make sure that you're going off the time on your watch. Okay, and to make sure that's accurate, you start it as your foot crosses that starting line, as you would go under the arch. Now, it's going to be a little bit strange and, dare I say, overwhelming for many runners running the London Marathon. It really is, especially once you get past sort of the Cutty Sark. It really is a tunnel of noise, of people, of colour. It is a full-on assault of the senses. And you know what? I actually know people who've come away from London and said, I did it once and I never want to go back because it was too much. Now, there are going to be a lot of you out there who are going to go, oh, that sounds brilliant. Okay, I would love that. You know what? And you know what? I enjoy it as well. But if you are the kind of person who likes just running on your own in a solitary space and you're not used to being crowded around by other people, and this is going to be your first mass participation event, just brace yourself for what can be, you know, quite an intense assault upon the senses, especially at certain parts on the course. To start with, however, there's not very much risk of that. Because you have all these different starting pens, you don't have all spectators in one point. If we have 5 starting pens this year, which I think I saw, I'm just going off the top of my head here, then the spectators are going to be split between those 5 different routes. Okay, so it's not going to be very difficult for what I can remember. At that point in the event, there are no barriers running along the side that, you know, are designed to keep spectators out of the road. Okay, you'll just be running across down a road in a residential area of southeast London, with, you know, a few people cheering you on and people outside a pub cheering as you go past. It's not the most inspiring start to an event, I have to say. I believe the reason that it starts in southeast London is because it's an area of the city that they feel they can close down because it's so heavily residential without affecting traffic flow into sort of other areas of the capital. I mean, London Marathon Day, you don't want anyone to be driving either way, but it's a lot simpler if they go in that very residential heavy area. Now, the downside to all this view is that it's really quite uninspiring for a good chunk of the course. Now, it's also worth noting that there is a sort of a downhill that starts around about the 1 mile mark, and it lasts for around about sort of the best part of a mile itself. Actually, it's a very gentle, I've never actually noticed it, imperceptible downhill, but it definitely is there. There is a net elevation loss in the London Marathon, but it's only realistically about a 1%, 2% gradient for the most part. So you don't have to think, oh, I need to really think about my downhill running. You're not really going to notice it. Just to make you aware, if you are running and you look at your watch and you go, oh, I'm running a lot faster than I thought I would be, it's probably simply the gradient at that point. Now, after around 9 kilometres of running through a relatively uninspiring area of southeast London, you will reach Greenwich. Now, this is a very nice area in southeast London, and you will know that you're You reach it when you run around the Cutty Sark, okay, which is, I believe it's a replica of a large sail ship. And this is when the race really starts to hot up from a spectator perspective. This is where a lot of people will come. Greenwich is a nice place to go and sit and enjoy in the park. And it actually is parallel, well, it's very close to the race start. So if somebody did go to Greenwich Park or Blackheath to see you off, I'm sure that the starting areas are spread a little bit wider this year if there's 5 of them. They can walk at a relatively leisurely pace and get to the Cutty Sark in time for you to come round and see them. So it's a very popular place and there is a lot of noise. There is a big camera, sort of broadcast camera. They have huge screens and they'll film you all running past. I can understand somebody feeling a little hard done by before they get to the Cutty Sark, thinking, hang on, this is the London Marathon, I've heard so much about it. And it just feels a little bit limp, a little bit empty. But you get to the Cutty Sark and this we go, oh right, yeah, I get it now. Now, physiologically at this point, you should be feeling really good, okay? We're around about 10k into the race. You do not want to be feeling that your legs are starting to get tired. This should feel just like a really easy start to a long run, okay? If you are thinking, oh, you know what? My legs are starting to feel it already, okay? And you have done a reasonable amount of training. You haven't just rocked up on the day to try and blag it all. Slow down. You may be getting caught up in the excitement. You have a really long way to go at this point. So if at any point in the first 10 kilometers, you start to feel your legs sort of giving you some feedback and saying, oh, you know what, this is tough, slow down. Take a walk break if you have to, okay? If it is your first marathon, there is a good chance that you're going to be walking for sort of some good stretches of it, I'm afraid. So just check in with your body at this point. Make sure it's not tired. You should be running on a bit of a high, but don't let that affect you and your legs and your pace, okay? You need to think, I'm going to be out here still for several hours and, you know, I've got to focus on keeping my legs and my mind in a good space. Now at this point, you need to start thinking ahead to something called the wall. You may have heard runners describe this. You know, you hit the wall, but you've just got to push on through. There's this moment in a marathon where people suddenly feel like they can no longer continue. It's made out to be this mythical, you know, idea that it can be mental, that you can just push through it. Now, this can take a number of forms, but the most common form of people suddenly feeling the wheels come off rapidly is nutrition. With a half marathon, most people, I think the average half marathon time is around about 2 hours. Most people get around a half marathon on a decent breakfast. When you're tackling a marathon, however, it's very different, and this is one of the reasons that people struggle with the full distance so much. Most people only have enough energy stores in their body to last them for 90 minutes of exercise, maybe 2 hours. After this, you will literally start to run out of fuel like a car might. And the way that you avoid this is by eating as you are running. Now, if your longest run ahead of the marathon isn't much more than 2 hours, you may not have really experienced this, or you may have just thought you were getting tired. But if you want to get round a full marathon, you need to take on calories in some way, shape or form. Now, I would wager that 5-10% of people who line up to the London Marathon haven't given any thought to nutrition. They haven't thought that they need to eat when they're running because they simply haven't run long enough in their training to realise this is going to be a problem. And then around about kind of the halfway mark, bang, they blow up. They hit the wall and their body just shuts down and they're forced to a walk. Now this isn't something you can push through. You need fuel like a car would need fuel, okay? If you don't want the fancy sports nutrition gels, there are lots of enthusiastic supporters with big bags of Haribo or other crisps, treats. You might even get a can of beer if you're lucky. There are calories on course at mass participation events like this that you wouldn't normally get. However, we don't want to rely on is it 2 or 3 sort of water stations that also have the gels at the London Marathon. We want to be self-sufficient. We want to carry our own fuel, and running gels are quite lightweight. They can sit inside the shorts of your running pockets of your running shorts, and I would generally recommend most people look at 2, maximum 3 gels per hour of running. And when you reach the Cutty Sark, this is when you need to start thinking about taking your nutrition, okay? Because most people are going to be about an hour into the race at this point. You want to, at the latest, be thinking about taking on some food at this point. Now, you need to test your nutrition in your training. So with the last couple of weekends that we have remaining, you really want to make sure that you're testing your nutrition, whether you're using gels, whether you're using your own sort of homemade solution. Okay, you can't afford to leave it to chance. You can't afford to have a stomach upset on the race. You can't afford to blow up because you didn't test your nutrition in your training. So this is a big piece that you need to think about. Okay, you can't just blag it on the day. That you really need to take into consideration. How is it that I can make sure that I have enough energy in my system to be able to complete this event? From here, the Cutty Sark that is, you run towards Canada Water and some of the docklands. Now, as you look out over the Thames from here, you'll be able to see Canary Wharf. And having, lived in London for so long myself, I guess I take things like this for granted. But for a lot of people who don't know the city well, or people who've never spent any time in London, this could still be quite a cool part of the race, and the spectator numbers are really going to start increasing here. You're going to have a lot of people who are going to be offering you sweets. There are going to be bands that are playing. There are going to be lots of people cheering you on if you've got your name on your number or your top. That's really going to help. And this is where the race, where the race really starts to come alive. When you go along this, run along the Thames, and the route does really hug the shoreline quite nicely. Well, shoreline, riverside, whatever you want to call it. It's almost an estuary in London, isn't it? So take your pick. And you keep following this around through Bermondsey and other areas, which aren't, known for being the most interesting, the most exciting, but nonetheless, nothing wrong with them. And you're going to start to feel the miles accumulate in your legs. If you have only ever run a half marathon before, then you may think to yourself, yeah, this is it. This is like, I'm still in my comfort zone. I'm still feeling good. Do not get ahead of yourself, even as you start to make your way through Rotherhithe and Bermondsey. Okay, you still have a long way to go. In fact, as you approach Tower Bridge, the most iconic moment in the London Marathon, crossing Tower Bridge, you're still not even halfway there. Now, this is a point that I really want to make, which is that a full marathon is so different to a half marathon. They almost feel like 2 different sports. They are so different. I know that's probably a slight dramatisation, a slight exaggeration, but honestly, there are so many people who go into a marathon with far more confidence and bravado than they should, having ticked off a half marathon, and think, yeah, I've got this, I'll just do it again. And this is the kind of mindset that I had when I started running. I did a half, that was really easy. I did it in just over 1 hour 30, bring on the marathon. But it's such a different test of endurance, such a different test of your legs, and so many people get themselves into trouble with overconfidence. Now, as you pass through Tower Bridge, okay, take the moment to just, because it is absolutely stacked with spectators, it's a really beautiful bridge, just take the time to enjoy it, soak it all in, okay? Unless you are going for sub 3 or some other time goal that you know that you're going to get by the slimmest of margins, okay, just scale it back a bit, okay? Not saying jog it in, but just focus less on the pace and just, take into it, the fact that you are there, that stream of runners, the bridge itself, all the support that you get. Unfortunately, the second time I did the race, that moment was rather ruined by somebody next to me projectile vomiting all over their trainers, but these things happen in mass participation endurance events. So yeah, the Tower Bridge, is a fantastic moment, okay? Soak it in and enjoy it. Coming off Tower Bridge, you will do a sharp right at Tower Hill. And this is an interesting part of the course because as you do the right hand turn, you're going to see runners that are way ahead of you running in the opposite direction. Now, this can be quite difficult in some ways because you know that you are coming around this corner, you've just come over Tower Bridge, you're not even halfway there, and yet you have people coming into the last 5k of their event running towards you. And yeah, this can be a difficult one to deal with mentally, definitely. I had it before where I've come around this corner and I've seen a friend of mine running the other way and I've given them a wave and a shout out. But there's nothing that, if you look at the course, you'll know that you have a long way to go. You've got about 15k until you get back to this point to run. Don't let it get to your head, okay? There are always going to be people faster than you. There are always going to be a lot of people faster than you, chances are, unless you are an elite athlete, in which case you're probably not listening to this, let's be honest. But yeah, you're then going to run down the highway, which is a great part of the course, I think. You have two-way traffic. It's just about the only place on the course where you have people on the other side of the road running towards you. But what really sets this part out is the crowd support, because you have a lot of people, a lot of running clubs, a lot of cheering stations will plant themselves there because they can see runners twice as they come past. I remember my old running club had a cheering station there because they want to see all the athletes twice. You see them look really good as they go one way up the highway, and you see them looking close to death as they come back the other way. But yeah, it's a really special, really nice part of the course. So I recommend that you can look forward to this as you sort of cross the halfway point, which is on the highway itself, and it will be marked by a big banner that says halfway. There are also mile and kilometre markers if you are unaware as you run along. And as you run along the highway, yeah, just take the time to enjoy the spectacle, the people, the music, the noise, okay? Everything that makes London special. Now, as you run under this halfway banner, chances are, in fact, I'll put very good money on the fact that a lot of you be very confused and concerned, because your watch will either have told you that you've gone halfway before, or will only tell you that you reached the halfway point until after you run under that banner, sometimes by a good few hundred metres. Now, some people can be incredibly thrown by this. They go, hang on a minute, the course is wrong. No, the course isn't wrong. The course is measured. It's not unheard of for marathons, 10Ks, half marathons to end up being short or long, but London, I don't think it's ever happened, okay? Chances are the course is absolutely accurate, but there are two reasons why there's a discrepancy in what your watch is telling you is the distance and what the reality is. So the first one is the strength of the GPS signal. If you are running around high buildings, and also in groups of people, that is going to have a real impact on the accuracy of the GPS reading. If you think about all of the tens of thousands of people who are running the London Marathon, all of those signals bouncing off the satellites above your heads, okay, it is absolutely inevitable that technology is going to struggle, and it's not going to be able to keep track of all of those runners in a super accurate way. Okay, throw into all the glass buildings which disrupt the signals and make them bounce around, and you're just setting yourself up for sort of frustration if you listen only to your watch and trust that over what the organisers have put there. The second reason this might be off is because you may well have actually run more than 13.1 miles at this point. The reason being, you will see a blue line on the road as you're running, and that is the racing line. That is what the elite at the very front of the field will be running on. You, as a age group runner, I'm almost certain you're not going to be running on that line the entire time. In fact, if you try to stick to that line doggedly, you're going to make yourself very unpopular as you shoulder barge people, people trip over you, and sort of generally shout at you for cutting them up. Because there are going to be so many people, it's going to be so tightly packed, unless you are well into that in that like 2 hours 30, which again, you're probably not listening to this. If you're coming around that 2 hours 30 mark, then it may be a long line of people running on that line. But the more people there are, the more congested the course gets. I mean, it's just going to be too many people for you to be able to follow that line religiously. So you are going to run over the distance. You probably will run 26.3, 26.4 miles, maybe even more, depending on the amount that you move around. Okay, it is incredibly rare that somebody runs the actual distance of an event, and this is just something you're going to have to deal with. What I do not want you to do is to be coming into St James's Park and your watch comes up and says you've run 26.2 miles, and you press stop on your watch there and go, well, I've done my marathon, that's my finishing time. Okay, please don't do that. Get to the finish line. That is your finishing time for the race. Now, as you're running down the highway, you will approach the Limehouse Link Tunnel, after which you'll do a right, and that will take you through a relatively sort of narrow street as far as roads go within the course, as it is taking you towards the Isle of Dogs, okay? And on the Isle of Dogs is Canary Wharf. Now, Canary Wharf is pretty famous on the course for a number of reasons. Firstly, it's because all of the GPS signals get so confused by all the skyscrapers with all their windows that your watch will just kick out total gibberish as you're running through this area, chances are. Unless you are using a foot pod that measures distance, okay, you're going to get all sorts of absolute, I'm not going to say the word, but if you're British, you probably know what it is. It is just absolute nonsense kicked out from your watch, which, you know what? That's absolutely fine. Because you're there to run a marathon. You're not there to capture a file on a GPS watch. And the other reason that Canary Wharf, and especially the bit of the marathon that approaches Canary Wharf, is infamous, is because a lot of people in their training would have never run over a half marathon before. And it's once they get to this point that the distance really starts to bite, and they start to realise, oh, okay, yeah, this is pretty serious. Like, my legs starting to maybe get sore, a little bit crampy. Things are starting to really add up at this point, and I've still got a long way to go. You will start to see a lot of people start to walk at this point, and you just need to bear in mind that, you know, it's okay to walk for short periods, but good news is there is a lot of support around this area. There are people to lift you up, there are people to push you on, but if you do need a bit of a walk break, okay, don't feel that you're not allowed to give yourself this. I'd much rather that somebody takes a number of short walking breaks for a minute here and there than gets to the 35-kilometre mark and has a spectacular implosion and has to walk all the way for the last 7k. As you leave Canary Wharf, you are 20 miles into the race. You will have run 20 miles under your own steam. And you know what? That's pretty cool. Now, as you come out of Canary Wharf, your legs are going to be in a pretty bad way. If you get to the 20-mile mark and your legs are in a good way, I would like you to surrender yourself to sports science for extensive testing at your local university laboratory. Okay, this is the point of the race where you hit that kind of 30-kilometre mark, sort of 20-ish miles mark, where it doesn't really matter who you are, the wheels start to come off. And if you are pacing a marathon well, if you are looking to do well at this race especially, this is, you know, everybody starts to suffer at this point. As we come into the last sort of quarter of the race or so, you are going to find yourself in, you know, a fair bit of trouble, and it's going to be hard physically and mentally to keep the legs turning over. Out of Canary Wharf, you then have another relatively uninspiring bit of running, I'm afraid, as you make your way back towards Westminster. Running through the area of Poplar in East London, It's not terribly exciting, but at this point you're going to really start to see all of the numbers on the archways that count you down. Things are going to start adding up pretty quickly. You're going to start to see yourself into the 30s with the kilometre markings, okay? You're into the 20s with the mile markings. You are getting there. It is hard. It's a long day out, a marathon. I don't care who you are. Even if you're running in 2 hours, that's a long time to be sat at your limit, okay? It is a long, hard day, but you got this. You just need to keep your head down, drop your pace if you need to, okay? And just try to stay positive. Try not to get all doom and gloom about your pace. You may, at this point, your goal of going sub 3 or sub 4 may have evaporated, okay? Maybe things just haven't gone your way. Try not to get to your head, okay? Try and just pull yourself up and think positively. I know that sounds a bit corny, but try not to let the dark thoughts on this relatively uninspiring bit of road get to you too much, okay? Because you are closer than you realise. At mile 22, you will link back up with the highway. Remember that big bit of road that has runners going in both directions, okay? You'll come along here and you'll pick up all of the crowd support and you'll see people running towards you. And these will be people who are lagging behind you. Now, depending on your mindset, this can be nice somewhat to think to yourself, wow, like I'm over here and they're over there. Now, you could say it's a bit of a mean thing to think. However, the reality is it can be a nice reminder of the fact of, you know what, I'm running a marathon and I'm giving myself permission to feel good about myself, to find a little positive, okay? Depending on the kind of times that you're running, there may be a lot of people who are coming down the other side of the highway who are all walking. And you may think to yourself, wow, like I'm still running, maybe not constantly, but I'm still running. And everybody on the other side is reduced to a walk, okay? And it can be a nice boost to your ego and also just help you think more positively. You have all of the support around there. There's people to drag you along, help push you towards Westminster and the finish line. As you peel off the highway and you do a right, you can look to your left and see Tower Bridge again. And you know at this point, you've only got around about 5k to go. Okay, this is the turning for heroes. I think, you know, when you turn that corner, when you look to your left and you see Tower Bridge, and it feels like you're back on the course almost. You know, you had that big loop around the Isle of Dogs, which felt like a real bit of a detour that you were taking to add on the distance, and now you're back where you were and you're heading back into Westminster. And you can afford to say to yourself, oh, only a park run to go. But you know what? It's probably going to be one of the slowest park runs of your life, I'm afraid. Because your legs are going to be screaming out. But if you can keep running, keep pushing. Drop your pace, but just try that relentless forward motion. At this point of the course, you can start to feel the energy just gets a little bit electric. You can start to feel this momentum. You start to get a sense of how close it is you're getting because everybody there is in your corner. They will all be shouting you along because they know that you're getting really close to the finish line. Again, you've still got a way to go. It still may take you sort of 40, 45 minutes, maybe up to an hour if they're going to be walking breaks. But given how far you've come already, there will be a sense of as you get closer to Westminster, as you start to come around that corner and you start to see the House of Commons on the skyline, you're going to know, I'm getting there. You know what? I think I'm actually going to do this. You'll run through the City of London, which is the oldest part of London by some stretch. There used to be a wall that went around the City of London, the square mile. You'll come through this and it will start to have this slightly different feel around it, very different to the architecture of the other areas. And then you experience the Blackfriars Underpass. And this is a slightly surreal point of the race because for the vast majority of the event, okay, the first 5 kilometres excluded because things are relatively subdued at that point, but definitely from the Cutty Sark onwards, there's been a lot of support, a lot of people cheering you along. And you get to this tunnel section and it goes eerily quiet. And you can hear your footsteps as you're running along. There's suddenly just this real drop in noise. Now, a little bit of an anecdote. I think it was the second time I did the race. Yeah, it was the second time I did the race. I was running through the tunnel, and there was an ambulance in front of me. Somebody had collapsed on the course, and they're trying to get them to safety. And there was a runner who was running along down the middle of the tunnel with his headphones in, completely oblivious to the fact that everyone else was running on the footpath or right to the side, and he was single-handedly holding up an ambulance, running along with his music in his ears, because he needed his music to motivate himself through the marathon, right? And they had to one of the paramedics had to get out and grab this guy and pull him out of the way, and then get back in the ambulance so they could get this person the help that they needed. And this is the reason why headphones are banned during these events, and why they should be banned, because you can't hear what's going on around you. Now, no doubt this chap felt absolutely awful when he realised that he'd held up an ambulance. I'm not sure how long that was the situation for. It may have been that the ambulance only lost sort of 20-30 seconds. But, you do need to be aware of your surroundings around you. At the London Marathon, there's going to be so much noise. There's going to be so much to motivate you. Leave your headphones at home. Back to the tips itself. You're going to go through this underpass. It's going to be quite dark, but you will come out the other side, and the noise will come back and the sunlight will come back. It's not an especially long tunnel, but it is going to feel long with your leaden legs as they are at that point, and it's going to be a bit of a slog to pull yourself through there. But as you come out of that tunnel, as you come onto the embankment, you get the best view that you'll see all day, which is a really clear view of the Houses of Parliament in front of you. And the Houses of Parliament are more or less the finish line. You may feel this weight lift from your shoulders when you get that really clear view of the House of Parliament. And you may find yourself picking up the pace a little bit. You may think that time goal that you had almost given up on, you know what, it might actually be feasible. However, a word of warning, you are still 2 miles away from the finish line at this point. With 2 miles to go, you can be relatively confident that you can run, walk, or crawl your way to get there somehow. Obviously, the first year that I did the London Marathon, I'm struggling to remember, I think it's 2017, 2018, I'm going to say 2018, was the year it was incredibly hot. And I remember running down the embankment, and it was a bit like running through a field hospital. There were so many people on the ground around me receiving medical care. So never take it as a given that you're going to finish. Don't push your body really hard, dig really deep at this point, because you still have 2 miles to go, which for most people is still going to be, a good, at this point, sort of 15-20 minutes. So don't get yourself too carried away. Don't dig yourself a huge hole, but just sort of take pride in the fact you've made it this far. Make sure you're standing up tall, that you've got a good stride length, okay? And keep moving towards Big Ben, okay? I promise it does get closer. It's not just an optical illusion. However, remember what I said about the House of Parliament almost being the finish line? Well, it's not quite the finish line, I'm afraid. By the time that you get to Westminster Station, okay, which is just in front of the House of Parliament, and you do a 90-degree right-hand turn, you've still got around about 1,000 metres of running to go, okay? So you can't afford to get yourself too carried away at this point, but you are so close. Now, you're going to run along here. The crowd is going to be probably the best piece of support you get all day is going to be around the House of Parliament, because everybody's going to be cheering you on. Everybody's going to be so happy that you made it. And then you're going to do a slight left, a dog leg, as you come into St James's Park. Now, as you do this, at least last time that I did it, there were some big signs that were giving you a countdown into how far it is that you had to go. I think it was 400 metres, 200 metres, 100 metres. These were big signs in the middle of the in the middle of the sort of the path, the road, just to make it really obvious. And you can use these to your advantage because it can really be deceiving because you don't see the finish line until you're practically on top of it at the London Marathon. So they can really help you pace. I'm not going to say your sprint, but your finishing effort to make sure you don't go hard too soon. But I remember when I did it the second time, my first time didn't go very well, so don't tend to have many anecdotes from that one. But the second time I did it, came into this bit and I was running. I was going really strong. I was on for a massive personal best, and I felt my left calf just start. I think it was because I changed my gait because I was excited to get to the end. My left calf just started to twinge, and I slowed down to a bit of a walk. And this guy said, "Oh, come on, let's go, we're nearly there." I said, "No, mate." I said, "I'm worried my calf might cramp." Still had about 500 meters to go at this point. Don't do anything stupid. Don't burst into a sprint, even if your legs can handle it. Okay, you still have to make sure that you actually get to the finish line. If you got the world's worst cramp, a proper Charlie horse that just crippled you, it was like somebody kicking you in the back of the leg, and you could barely stand up. Are you sure you'll be able to make it to the finish line? So just use your noggin. Be sensible at this point, okay? It's so close. Pushing your body really hard to save 10-15 seconds is not going to be worth it. As you approach the finish line, you will come up to a right-hand turn in front of Buckingham Palace. Okay, you do this right-hand turn. It will take you along to the Victoria Memorial statue. I can't remember the exact name of it. I'm sure I've just upset a lot of people there. And as you reach this, which is the big fountain, it's not a fountain, isn't it? It's just a big gold statue, I think. Then you do a right, and that will take you pretty much straight to the finish line. And you will see it there in front of you. There'll be the music, there'll be the crowd support, everything will be there, and you will cross the line as a marathon finisher. For many people, crossing their first marathon finish line feels like being born again. It feels like starting a new life. It is an absolutely life-changing experience for someone. For myself, I didn't have that quite so much. Firstly, because the first time that I got round the marathon, first time I did London Marathon, I ended up with knee pain that forced me to a hobble for most of the second half of the race. So I hardly felt absolutely electric crossing that finish line. But also for me, being a triathlete who had completed, several half Ironman events by the time I did my first marathon, it was nice. It was cool. It was a good experience, but it didn't really change my life. So if you are listening to this as a triathlete who's doing the London Marathon, then don't expect this huge euphoric experience that you hear lots of people talk about. Of course, I hope that you have this. Bear in mind, you've already experienced a lot in your triathlon career, and that whilst a marathon, I'd always encourage everyone to do a marathon. I think every runner should do at least one of them. I'm not saying that from a gatekeepy experience. I'm not saying that everybody has to get a sub 3, a sub 4 hour marathon. I think it's just a nice experience. It doesn't even have to be an organised event. I know a lot of runners who would never consider doing a London Marathon. I know some runners who'd never consider doing an organised event. But to be able to tick that off and just go, yeah, you know what, I did that, that's pretty special. Now, at the finish line, you are likely not going to be thinking straight. And because of this, they have a lot of volunteers on hand who are there to help sort of steer runners to where they need to be. There's medical assistance. I believe they have a new system this year where you need to request a medal. I don't know if the deadline has passed for that when this podcast comes out. Do check that. I hope that you get a medal if you want one. I imagine the same goes for t-shirts. But you can collect your medal, collect your t-shirt. I believe there's normally I seem to remember getting a goodie bag where I just got a few samples of things and leaflets and all that you get. And you can also go and grab your drop bag that you dropped off at the start, and then you have earned yourself a nice lie down and a little bit of a rest, some recovery. But do be mindful that if you sit there lying on the ground for too long, not doing anything, your legs could seize up and make it very hard to walk when you do decide that you need to get going. So, as you can probably tell, the fact it's taken me 50 minutes to get this far. Uh, there's quite a bit to running a marathon, a lot more than most people realise. And I know a lot of what I've gone through has been sort of specific landmarks and that relating to the London Marathon itself. But it's not the kind of distance event that you can just turn up to and have a stab at. If you see these influencers, social media personalities, even celebrities who turn up and they'll do a marathon without any training, so they say, they're probably going to be either walking an awful lot of it, or they are people who are just very fit. They have a really good base level of fitness, and they have this one day where they just push through everything, and they come out the other side and they go, right, that's it, I've done my marathon. And I think that's a bit sad, personally, if somebody, runs a marathon and then never goes near running again. But you know what? It's a free country. That's just about it from me, really. I didn't touch on the subject of hydration. This is something that it's a bit of a no-brainer, isn't it? If you're running, it's worth taking a bit of a sip at every water station you go through. I believe the race organisers provide you with some instructions on the best way to sort of drink from the bottles and dispose of them so they don't become a slip hazard. One thing I will mention, if it does end up being a really hot day, is don't overdrink. If you consume far too much liquid, you can find yourself with a very dangerous condition, is hyponatremia. I'm not going to go into detail, but it's the reason that all sorts of sports drinks have salt in them, is to help with the absorption of the water into the system. If you take on no salt and drink a huge amount of water, you do run the risk of becoming very unwell. But unless you are going to be finishing the marathon kind of north of 5 hours and chugging water every aid station, you're not at really a high risk of hyponatremia, but it just seemed remiss of me not to mention it. So I hope that if you are running the London Marathon, that you've taken some really useful tips from this, and you can take them away and have a really great day. If you are doing the London Marathon in the future, maybe this inspired you to enter the ballot and have a go or run it for charity. The main way that people get into the London Marathon is via the ballot, but if you can raise enough money for one of the charities and get a spot through them, you do have to raise quite a lot of money. It's normally several £1,000s to get a charity place, and any shortfall you've got to make up yourself. But that's another option. Or if you get a good for age time, if you run another marathon very fast. The ballot is the way that most people get in. You just have to keep plugging away. I know some people who've got in 3 years on the bounce. I know some people who've been applying for 25 years and never got in. Running clubs, actually, they also have a selection of London Marathon places that you can have. So there are lots of ways in the London Marathon. I do really recommend it. I think it is really a must-do race if you are a serious athlete. If you're a triathlete, you just want to dabble in a bit of marathon, or if you are just a runner, I think it is really worth making the pilgrimage over to London and experiencing one of what some people do believe to be the greatest marathon in the world. But even if you are taking on another marathon or you take on another marathon at a later date, I hope that these steps have helped you understand just the enormity of the gap between the half marathon and the marathon. Don't go into it underprepared. Do take your training seriously if you want to have a result that you're happy with. So just a quick one before you go. If you listen to this podcast, if you enjoy it, if you find it gives you any value whatsoever, even if you just get to have a laugh at me, then I'd appreciate it if you could give me a nice 5-star rating and maybe write a little review if you've got another 30 seconds. Really appreciate that. Helps more people find the podcast and boosts this up in the algorithm, the all-important algorithm. So take care, everyone. Enjoy your next week of training, and if you're racing the London Marathon, the very best of luck to you.